Okay, I now have the huge honor of introducing the person who brought all of this together the last 4 days, a total rock star of the literary world upstate. I'm going to introduce Martha Frankel. I've known Martha for many years now. I've been coming to this festival since she launched it, 2010? And she's a dear friend, and now I'm going to read her official bio. Martha Frankel is the executive director of the Woodstock Book Fest, this wonderful, incredible festival that you have all taken part in. And also the secretary, treasurer, and stenographer. Sometimes she is the security team. And always, she is the biggest cheerleader for this collection of writers and readers. Her memoir, Hats and Eyeglasses, which is wonderful and funny and moving, delves into her family's obsession with gambling. Everyone, I give you the one and only Martha Frankel.
Before we do anything, we have to do the raffles, okay? I just have to get this out of the way. So, who doesn't have any skin in the game?
I don't.
No, you can't. Susan, grab this. I'm gonna throw it at you. Oh, don't let any of the pieces fall. Okay. Yep, hold on. We're gonna do this one first, and this one's on my phone, so Elizabeth Ann. Hold on.
What am I doing with these?
I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, this is for this raffle. So, pull out a number. It's Scrabble tiles, I numbered them 1 to 100. It was my best idea ever.
51.
51. No, that on the phone.
It's 15 if you turn it the other way.
No, but I could tell you what it is. Show me. It's 51. Oh, Leah Lou. Leah, her family owned Allen Jeans in Boyceville for many years. Okay, cool. She won the first one. And then the second one, Susan, put that back in because, weird stuff happens. Number 51 could come up again, okay? Pull another number.
3.
Oh, that's funny. Artie Schilling. All kind of cool. Okay, thank you all for doing this with me. Oh my God. Okay. This thing is it's like been an albatross. It's hot in here. Can we open some doors or something? Very hot up here under the lights. All right. The memoir panel is always my favorite part of the weekend, partially because it's the last part. And by this point, I've sort of had it. But this weekend has been so amazing. I don't even feel tired. I'm just so exhilarated. Clearly, we need to be in community. Clearly, we need to be sharing our stories. This is as old as fire, just getting together and being in community. So I'm going to introduce our writers, and then they're going to introduce their books, and then we're just going to talk. And you guys will be part of the conversation. All right? Hold on, I have to look it up. Because smarter people would have just written it down, but I'm not one of them. But I did learn how to say everybody's name right. So that's good. And putting this panel together is always really fun because James and Jackie, I need to thank the town of Woodstock for letting James and Jackie and I rent this place. It has turned out to be the perfect spot for Book Fest. It's big enough, it's close enough, there's parking, there's a big back room. I just really thank the town for letting us do that and really been joyous. And I want to thank WHAM, the Woodstock Artists Association, because they were the umbrella for the book fest this year, and that made all the difference. So that I could raise money and people could give more. So that was good, because usually it's a nightmare. Okay, Jennifer Cabot is the author of twinned memoirs, The Eighth Moon and Night Shining. One was published yesterday, I swear to God.
No, May 6th.
May 6th, but it's here. It's here. So that's, it's a big surprise. I didn't think it would be here. I was so happy to see it. She received an Andy Warhol Foundation Arts Writer Grant for her criticism and has been published in Bomb and the Best American Essays. Her writing has appeared in Granta, Harper's McSweeney's, Virginia Quarterly, LA Review of Books, and the New York Review. She lives locally, right? And is part of the core faculty of the Design Research MA at the School of Visual Arts. An apprentice herbalist, she lives in rural New York and serves on her volunteer fire department. I also was a volunteer fireman, so I love that. Oliver Radcliffe is part of the new wave of transgender writers unafraid to address the complex nuances of transition, examining the places where gender identity, sexual orientation, feminist allegiance, social class, and family history overlap. His work has appeared in the New York Times, the LA Times, Electric Literature, the Gay and Lesbian Review, Print Magazine, and Them. His monograph, Adult Human Male, was published by Unbound Edition in 2023, and his memoir, Frightening Horses, is out now with Roxane Gay Books. He currently lives on the Connecticut coast where he is raising his 4 children. Oh, Soph. Sophie Strand is a writer based in the Hudson Valley who focuses on the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology. Her poems and essays have appeared in numerous projects, in publications including Spirituality and Health, Atmos, Braided Way, and Art Papers. She is author of The Flowering Wand, The Madonna Secret, and the new memoir, The Body is a Doorway, as well as the creator of the popular Substack, Make Me Good Soil. You can follow her work on Instagram at
Cosmogony.
Cosmogony.
Don't worry about that word.
I'm going to say this because I'm looking out at Kay Golbeck. When Sophie was 14, Kay was running a mentorship program at the high school and approached me and said, hey, my office was next door. Would you like a mentee? And I heard that as somebody who's going to come and clean up the mess that I make. So I like welcomed Sophie into the office. I was like, okay, first thing you do is like go through the phone book and figure out this. And she was like, okay, I'm a writer. And I was like, yeah. My class is coming. I was so dismissive. I said, my class is coming later, stay around. And she did, and that afternoon she read a piece. I still remember it. It was like it happened yesterday. And we all were so bowled over. It was like, oh, I'm gonna go clean her room. That's the way this is gonna work. And so I've been watching her for 20 years, 15 years, and I'm just so proud of her, like it has anything to do with me. But her parents are Sophie Strand and Perdita Finn and Clark Strand. Clark changed my life, wrote a book called Waking Up in the Dark and taught me not to be afraid of getting up in the middle of the night. And that alone has changed me in myriad ways. I used to freak out that I was up, and now I'm like, oh, I'm up. Okay. He told me I should go outside and take a walk in the middle of the night. I thought he was crazy, but I don't anymore. So I just to say that Sophie is a really, really special person to me and to everybody who's read her work. She's put out more work than this entire room combined, and she's still a child. So, Sophie, tell us what your new book is about.
Well, after that was very generous. Martha was, you were a real life-changing moment. I actually was mentoring with Martha right at the moment when is this okay?
Yep.
Yeah. When I got very seriously ill at the age of 16. So it was pretty life-saving, I think, in a non-exaggeration to say that. My book is about chronic illness and ecology, it's about how very rarely are we given books where the person doesn't get better and doesn't achieve some wholeness or integration, but so many of us are exiled from that story. We have terminal or chronic or incurable illnesses. And I wanted to write a memoir that wasn't about getting better or getting an answer or a cure. It was about complicating our standard paradigms of wellness and wholeness, especially in an age of ecocide and late stage capitalism.
I can only laugh, she's so cute. Oliver, tell us about your book.
So my book is ostensibly about my transition, but it's a longer story because when I moved to this country 17 years ago, I was masquerading as a heterosexual woman. I was married to a man, we had 4 children. So the book starts when I first come out to him as queer, and it follows a 10-year period during which time I come out to my family and I start to transition and I go through the process. And the transition happens really at the very end of the book. And it's a complicated story, but when I say it's about me, I think about the agent Alice Latimer, who wrote in one of her Substack newsletters that when somebody reads a memoir, they're not trying to find out something about you, they're trying to find out something about themselves. And so I really wrote it in a way to speak to anybody who has ever been told that they are supposed to be one thing, and they feel in their core that they need to be something else, and that by being that person that they are going to cause upset or damage, and there's shame involved in wanting to be that person they want to be. So it's really a story for everybody who has ever wanted to go through any kind of transition, whether it's gender related or something entirely different.
Hi. Thank you guys. Thank you, Martha, Sophie, Oliver. I just want to say, when Martha emailed me, she was like, I was a firefighter too. So I have these books that are twinned memoirs. And the memoir part could probably be in quotes, because I never really thought that they were about me. So they both, back in the green room that is not green, but there's some green behind it, we were talking about this moment and how friggin' hard it is. And I wrote these 2 books to kind of the local histories that were my ways of navigating now, and also my ways of navigating being in the fire department as a kind of radical socialist, which is not how most of the people in the Montreal Fire Department identify. And they're also slightly about moving here, because I did move here. I moved from the UK as well because I was sick. So there's like some chronic sickness, there's some UK stuff. I feel like we're all in the right place. But I use those local histories as my way of navigating this moment. So back in the 1840s, there was a socialist uprising across upstate New York that basically began at the Massachusetts border and moved west to my county. And it ended in a shootout in a corral in drag. The lawmen were wearing corsets. The militants were dressed in dresses, calico, loose dresses that looked like house dresses, and they called themselves Indians. And in that uprising, it looks very Trumpy, but their dream was this kind of radical socialist anarchism, but they didn't call it that. They wanted no private property and no centralized government. And it happened in a moment that looks a lot like today. So in the wake of a recession that looks like the housing crisis, and in this moment of kind of mass democracy too, because every white guy suddenly could vote, which might not sound a lot from our point of view, but back then was huge. And I moved here in 2005, 2006, and so, which was right before the housing crisis, so I kind of dovetail the 2 moments, so they come together. And of course, serving in the fire department, most of my colleagues or comrades, their forebears fought in that uprising. And so it's just there beneath the surface, but nobody talks about it. If you go to Andy's, they celebrate their community day on the day the sheriff was shot. But nobody talks about the fact that the sheriff was shot, or they're celebrating a cop shooting. So that's the first book. And the hinge between the 2 books is my parents, who were committed cooperators. They worked on cooperatives their whole lives. So in the second book is about floods. So it's my climate book. So this is the Trump book, the second is the climate book. And it opens with the first flood. I have the first year I moved to Margaretville when my house is flooded. And then for those of you who've been here for a while, there's Hurricane Irene. But in 1950, Margaretville was flooded with what had been a Cold War weapon that GE developed. It was created by Kurt Vonnegut's big brother and a scientist who never finished high school. It is cloud seeding, rainmaking. And so New York City used it to end a drought. There was a drastic flood, blah, blah, blah. And through my floods, I start to discover that history. And the weapon itself spirals through time. It's the plot point for Cat's Cradle, and then it's used in the Vietnam War. It's why we have unleaded fuel in cars. Then Bernard Vonnegut gets the idea of geoengineering, basically using it to control temperatures, which is pretty much what people are talking about with climate change. And then he used it in Reagan's Star Wars. So it's a book that looks at the climate crisis from a kind of sidelong angle. And also, Margaretville is where some of the very first trees on Earth emerged 380 million years ago. You guys probably know about the Gilboa fossils. So those were the first trees on Earth. And those trees led to a mass extinction akin to our own. So it's really like looking at like all of this time and the way place holds that time. And my story's just kind of in there as a way to guide you through it. So, you know, I'm not the important part, or I try not to be. There you go.
So it's a beautiful way of describing your book because they're both so historical and beautiful. And, you know, we were impacted by Hurricane Irene, and I couldn't get to my office or my house. So I just drove around and like looked at other people's bad fortune. That's all I could say about those months. And I spent a lot of time in Margaretville because it was Margaretville and Prattsville were just so ruined. And I don't know why, I just had to keep going back. So what did you learn when you were writing your book? What did you learn about yourself that you didn't know? Oliver, we'll start with you.
Okay, I can answer that question pretty simply, which is that I learned I was trans. Because when I started writing my memoir, I didn't know I was trans. I came out to my husband in 2011 as queer, and he didn't accept it. He accepted that I was queer, he didn't accept that that was going to end our marriage. And he wanted to lock me into the marriage and keep me at home looking after his 4 children so that he could come and go with complete freedom. And there was a complicated time for me, obviously, because I did not want to stay married to him. And I didn't want to hurt my children, and he used my maternal instinct towards my children to keep me locked into the marriage for much longer than I should have given into. And so in order to try and help myself through this period of time where I felt like unbelievably trapped in this home, I mean, I loved my children, I loved being a parent, but I was desperate to get out and find queer community and start living my life. I was 40 by the time I came out, and I really felt like the clock was ticking. And I didn't really have the opportunity to get out much, so I started writing. And the writing that I did started to turn into a memoir, and as the story progressed, the memoir progressed, and I ended up with a memoir about coming out as a lesbian in a marriage. And by that time I was running a support group for women who were coming out of marriages into queer relationships. So that was my whole life. And by the time I finished drafting the memoir, I had started to transition, because when you're writing memoir, because you're not just writing a story, right? You really have to go deep inside yourself. And one of the reasons you have to go deep inside yourself is that if you're going to write about other people, you really have to look at your own part in what happened and really put yourself under some very severe scrutiny, because otherwise what you write is going to sound obviously biased and one-sided. And so I really had to go into who I was and what my experience was in order to write it. And the more I wrote about this, the more I started to understand that my issue was really not my sexual orientation, it was my gender. That my sexual orientation was an aspect of it, but it wasn't the fundamental aspect of it, because I am currently single. I am happy out of a relationship, and my attraction to women isn't important to me right now. My gender is vital. It's like the most important thing that I have. So by the time I finished this first memoir, I had started to transition, and I sent the memoir out to agents saying, well, look, I know that I identify as Oliver Radcliffe now, but here's my memoir about coming out as a lesbian, and they were like, hell no. We want to know the fun stuff. So I had to scrap the original memoir and start again, which in the end was a very good thing, because the second memoir that I wrote was considerably better than the first, because by that time I'd had some practice. So yeah, I discovered that I was a man by writing.
And that's going to happen to you too. Thank you.
I don't have a great answer yet. I'm rarely at a loss for words.
Okay, we'll come back.
I can try. I might have really discovered that I'm truly a socialist, or that I'm truly my parents' kid. And like I guess I kind of went into these books partly looking for my parents' lives. Like my dad died in 2010 and my mom in 2016, and they were very, very committed left progressive people and activists. And I wanted to excavate their lives and understand what it meant, and what it meant to be a person living in a rural, conservative place. Also, because my dad taught me that rural America was the seat of American socialism. And so I think I discovered a way to be a person who is the person I am, and to live in the place where I live, and to have community. And how to have community that is not like me. How to actually be in relationship with people whose political values are really different. And I don't know if that's going to continue to hold. Like, I have so much fear right now. I can't speak to that. But at the time I was writing, it was a place of having empathy. And maybe that's what I got and what I learned.
So.
It's a tricky one, and I think that I have to be careful to not disavow the topic of this panel by answering it, which is I learned that I don't ever want to write another memoir again. I only get one. A miracle happened with it, which is I had really come through academia and academic writing, and my work, although I had published a novel and self-identify as a novelist, the work of mine that got popular was nonfiction, experimental essays about ecology and myth and the history of religion. And so I've been kind of pigeonholed into writing nonfiction, and also into writing increasingly vulnerable work about trauma, PTSD, and illness. And part of that was really liberatory. And as someone who had been snared in the webs of other people's stories, unweaving those webs and reweaving them was really powerful. But I also, by the end of writing this memoir, was like, oh, I actually think I want to write young adult fantasy. Like, that's where my love is. And it had taken me, I think, since the age of 12 to remember that that's what I really wanted to write. And I had to exercise my own story and find myself again through a kind of scrutiny. I had to really look at these stories and say, like, was I the good person? Was I the bad person? Would someone else tell this story differently? And by the end of it, I thought, okay, I think I have self-imagined myself as an expert, but I'm not an expert, I'm a lover. And I have to not write from a position of expertism anymore.
Great. Also, you don't have to, once you write a memoir, you don't have to be a memoirist. And she seems like people always say, when are you gonna write your next memoir? I'm like, I'm not. I have no interest in it. I really don't. I mean, I love writing nonfiction. I write a lot. But the idea of like immersing myself in myself for 2 years is just like too exhausting for me. But that doesn't mean I don't want to write fiction or I don't want to write experimental stuff. So do you feel like now you have to write more memoir? Do you guys feel that way? Oliver, I want to say I want you to write another memoir, because when I finished it, I felt like, oh, this is a journey that's just starting.
So yes, and also no. I am not writing memoir again. It's a lot. Writing memoir is a lot, and publishing memoir is a lot.
Yeah.
But also, one of the reasons that I don't want to write memoir again is the most interesting part of my life has happened. I am now like really boring, and I'm really happy. Really happy being really boring. I do not want any more drama in my life. You know, when all of this stuff was happening, in the back of my brain I was like, okay, this is all great material. This awful, terrible thing has happened, but it's great material for the book. And now I don't want any of that. So I'm currently writing fiction, I'm writing a novel, but I'm using the novel to write about all the stuff that I couldn't go into here, partly because it didn't adhere to the narrative, i.e. it wasn't part, you know, it wasn't part of the narrative story of the story that I was telling. But if I can create characters and have those conversations through the characters, I've got so much more to say about gender and being trans and breaking down the reason I wrote this book was I really wanted to break down the barriers between trans people and cis people. This imaginary line that people think exists with trans people on this side and cis people on this side. It just is completely arbitrary and it's made up. It's a social construct. And I really wanted to use this book to break that down, which is why most of the book, right until the very end, is written before I transition. Because I start as somebody who is identifying as a cis het woman, because I really wanted people to see that, you know, all of these questions I'm asking myself, a lot of people ask. It's not that uncommon, it's not that unusual, it's just that the end result is quite unusual. So people give it this name, transition, transgender, and then it becomes this thing that is seen as separate, but it's really not. So that's what I really want to lean into in the fiction, is like breaking down this idea that we're so different when actually there are kind of grades of this in all of us. And I think that the more we can see how much this is in all of us, the less scope or reason there is for the kind of prejudice that we're experiencing at the moment.
Yeah, the last panel was about permission. Who gets the permission? Whose story are we telling? And Sophie, I feel like your book is so specific. You have this disease. And it is, you know, well, you wrote a Substack recently about, please stop asking me how I am. And I see you and I'm always like, hey, but I don't ask that. I say, how's today? You know, we ran into each other last week at the spa and we had like a funny conversation. How was that massage?
I was good.
Deep, right?
It's hard, actually. I will say, like, I won't lie. Like, it's really hard with Ehlers-Danlos to not be injured. So.
Well, I want to say this. I went there with a bad neck. And she said, should I work deep? And I said, yes. And for like a week, I was like, whoa, I didn't really mean deep, but she's a great masseuse. Anyway, but I saw Sophie there and like, I want to say to her, hey, you doing good? Like, but this book like really puts it into perspective. Like what it's like, it's like Sophie sort of says that she doesn't want to fail our expectations of how she is, right? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in a culture where, you know, we're supposed to make other people feel okay with not wanting to stay with hard things. That it's really, we're really uncomfortable in American culture with death, with illness, with decay, with people. We also have this idea of healthism, and the idea of healthism is that health is somehow a personal responsibility or possession. People get sick and then they're personally responsible for getting better. So it's kind of, it's the fusion of like New Age spirituality, an old Christian idea of sin, also the medical industrial paradigm, whereby it's not all of these societal pressures making you sick, it's you individually. You haven't done enough celery juice, you haven't paid enough money to boutique somatic practitioners to integrate your trauma. You know, I started to get very critical of these ideas that health is this performative thing that, you know, that people with low vibrations or with shadows are sick, that we're, you know, because we haven't taken enough care of our bodies. We always want to explain away someone else's illness or their terminal diagnosis because they weren't doing it right. That way we feel protected, like we'll do it better. And so oftentimes I have an incurable illness and there is no cure. And it's degenerative. And so I see people who know this and they say, you're feeling better, right?
Your hair looks good.
And I say like, what? I mean, I'm feeling joy. There's a lot happening in my life, but I'm falling apart. Like, what about this interaction makes you so uncomfortable that you need me to make you feel better, and you shut down intimacy. So.
Yeah, I think it's like when you say to somebody, my mother died, and they say, how old was she? You're like, who cares? But what they're really saying is, give me a number that'll make me feel safe.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of, like, they're not really talking about your loss, they're just like protecting themselves.
Yeah, we are not great. I mean, this really goes to what you're talking about, Oliver, which is we're not great at this culture with illegibility or transition, liminal realms, but that's usually where we are. We're usually not well or unwell or happy or sad or male or female. We're usually somewhere verbing. You know, we're so stuck in the subject object realm, but we're usually gerunding. And so I just really loved you saying that. We're all in transition right now. Yeah.
And so I think you start writing one book, and then somewhere along the way you're like, oh wait, what is this about? I mean, Susan Brown was my mentor when I was writing Hats and Eyeglasses, and she used to give me the look, and the more we would go away on these writing retreats, and she'd say, what are you writing about? I'd be like, I don't know. But I started to really, put the pieces in that only belong there. So I want to talk about that, about getting rid of the stuff that doesn't belong. Because that is what makes a memoir concise and clear. You can tell your past, but you can't put in the parts that take us away from the story, that take the story away from moving forward. So when you were writing, Jennifer, I mean, your thing is so drenched in history. I have lived here for 50 years. I didn't know anything. No, I really didn't.
Well, I think, so I have so many things to say in this moment. One, I kind of wanted to write against the idea that you had to leave things out. Obviously I didn't put everything in, but I also, I am really stymied by the idea of progress, as I think everybody else on here on the panel is. Narrative memoir often follows a kind of progress idea. I started with this problem and not fixed, which is writing against the recovery, being sick story. And for me, I didn't want to write that as an idea, chronology in novels, all of that is a way of kind of smuggling in the ideas of capitalism, which is based on this idea of progress, or chronological time, which is its own false narrative. Seasonal time is much more true. So I wanted to write in a way, and my brain also doesn't function like that. My brain functions where all the things kind of happen all at once and feel all connected to it in this way that's really strange. Because I don't have a kind of linear progress in my thinking. So for me, it was how to write in a way that could create a new template where all the things could fit. I mean, obviously I left things out. And so it was how to give that way of thinking space or a formal thing in a book. And so a lot of it is also nature writing, where it's I write about the things that are happening seasonally around me, suddenly there's the snake out in early April at the wrong time, or finding community with the efts, or different plants around me. Yeah.
So the audience is going to ask this question over and over, so I'll ask it first. Were there things that you had to show to people in your lives? None of these memoirs, except Oliver's maybe, but he had already done it. Did you have to break that boundary where you were writing about somebody else, and was that okay? Did you? I mean, you did. You wrote about your family, so what was that like?
Well, so, I did not show it to anybody before it was already in print. I did show it to everybody who was in it before it hit the bookshelves. And I did that. I didn't show them in advance because I really wanted to take responsibility myself. I didn't want that. I didn't want to make it somebody else's responsibility to tell me what I couldn't put in. I wanted to have the responsibility while writing it of being fair, and of holding myself as accountable as I held anybody else in this book, and of being very conscious of what I put in that was necessary for the story, and what I put in because I wanted to be right. And all the stuff that I put in because I wanted to be right, I took out because it was, that's not the place for this. My ex-husband, when I first started writing the book, I said to him, I'm going to do a writing class, because I have no formal education in writing, I'm just an avid reader. And I said, I'm going to do a writing class, and he said, okay. And I said, I'm going to do a memoir writing class, and he said, okay. So I said, I'm going to be writing about our family. He said, okay. I said, that means I'm going to be writing about us. And he said, fine. And I said, you don't seem very bothered about this. And he said, well, you're not going to get it published, are you?
The old nobody's ever going to read it.
And then he followed that up and said, hypothetically, if I do get it published, how will you feel about it? And he said, oh, it'll be such a niche audience, nobody I know will read it. So he actually chose not to read it. And he knows it's published, my children talk about it, it's in the...
Did your children read it?
My children have not read it.
Okay, I always tell this story, it's my favorite story. My friend Marion Winnick, I met her because she's a memoirist and I loved her work. And my mom read First Comes Love, her story about marrying the gay figure skater. It was the last book my mother read before she went blind. And so every once in a while, and she lived for another 10 years, she'd say, I wonder how Marion and the kids are. And I'd say, who's Marion? And she'd say, you know, Marion Winnick. Well, we didn't know her. But then Facebook happened and I saw Marion Winnick and I told her that story and she was like, I love your family. I said, I just published a book. And so I sent her my book and she flew me to Baltimore to teach in front of her class, her memoir class. And I said to her, so what did the boys think? Like, she helped her husband commit suicide because he was dying of AIDS. I said, so what did the boys think? And she said, they never read it. They were then 22 and 25. They're now 52 and 55. They never read it. So when people say, you know, your family, I don't see them being that curious. So your kids have not read it.
No, my kids are like, we were there. Why would we want to read it?
Yeah. So wait, nobody in your family has read it. That's fascinating.
Oh wait, no, my parents have read it. And I've got to tell you this story.
Yeah.
So my father, in the previous panel, they were talking about, one of the authors was talking about, you know, her father was worried he was going to be the villain of the story. And so my father was a little bit worried that he was going to be the villain. I'm like, hell no, Dad, you are literally the hero of this book. But I said to him, look, it's got some sex in it. So I'm going to send it to you, but I'm going to put a post-it on the front cover with the page numbers of the sex bit so that you can skip them. So I sent him this book, and then I get an email a week later saying, okay, but I've read all the sex bits, and I'm fine with that. So now I'm going to
Boring stuff.
And apparently he was fine with it. He was only upset about the fact that I wrote about class. He said, you can write about sex, but you can't write about money. You can't write about money where I came from.
That's the other thing that I always bring up. People think that the thing we hide is sex. The thing we hide is money. You ask people how many people they slept with, they're like 102. How much money is in the bank? They freak out. They freak out, and I was one of them. I had a lot of issues around money, and 13 years ago, somebody helped me figure this out, and now I look at my money all the time, and it's not that important to me, you know. So, but really, that's your father's a perfect example of that. It'll be the sex stuff, but don't talk about money. Jennifer, what did your family have to say?
Well, my family was actually, so I write about my parents' deaths in the two books, my mom in the first one and my dad in the second. I don't know what my sisters are going to say about the second. My sister promises she's going to come to my book launch in Andy's. She's the one who doesn't like anybody talking about the family. We'll see. I was actually more worried about how people in my community were going to respond, because I write a lot about community and I write a lot about the fire department, like the weird conversations that I overhear about like socialism, Venezuela, the Canadians and their healthcare, and like all that stuff. Like, and I'll be on a scene and I'll just be like, I'm gonna sit in my car in a second, I'll type it down. Anyway, I put it in there verbatim. I thought they were gonna kick me out, and they haven't. And like weirdly, and I also write about my very first meeting in the fire department, and suddenly I find ourselves, we're all standing up to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm just like, what? I haven't said this since I was in elementary school, but also all along is my running monologue with all the things I disagree with in the pledge, and in the book. And I was like, somebody's definitely gonna come for that. So last summer I'm at a scene where the milk truck has crashed and my fire department has to respond. And when the milk truck crashes on Route 28, you can pretty much count on the fact that you're gonna be there for like 8 hours because you have to wait for 2 different tow trucks. And I'm stopping traffic because that's part of my job, and some 50-year veteran of the fire department comes up and he's like, I read your book. And I'm like, oh. I was like, so? Did you like it? And he's like, I finished it. I'm like, well, that definitely means he read the pledge part. And I'm like, okay, so? And he's like, I really liked what you had to say about Christianity, because I'm pretty critical of Christianity in there, and what you wrote about the pledge. I've been thinking that for years. And I was like, a win! And then there was another time, like this winter, the former editor of the local paper, the paper had been in his family for 100 years. And he comes up and he's like, I read your book and I really liked it. You got it right. And he's like, you didn't call it a sugar house. And so for I was very, for him, it was about the language I used, but it was really meaningful when this person liked it and liked the level of criticality I had in the world, but that I also have community love, I think. I appreciate it, yeah.
Sophie, are your parents some of your first readers?
Yeah, we have what we call a writing farm. My parents are my most critical readers, actually. They're the scariest people to give. I mean, the joke was I'd be like a 12-year-old if I'd hand my mom an essay and she'd be like, not your best work.
Not your best work.
Really? She couldn't lie. She doesn't like with mine. She was like, I don't know.
Yeah, Steve's my first reader and he often goes like this, huh? Rewrite.
But, I think for me, there are, there's so much I didn't include in this book. It kind of goes back to what you were talking about before. So I actually make it a story where there are really no bad guys except for two people, which is the medical industrial complex and grifter new age healers, and those are all monoliths. I don't name specific people, even though there are specific people in those. And then there's my ex. And by the time I was writing the book, I was like, well, we'll never speak again anyway. So I just have to make sure he can't sue me. So he was never going to read the book. So I edited out enough of his story that it didn't feel like a hit job.
Yeah.
And I think for me it was really important that it not be a vendetta. He had to be part of the narrative that was about something larger. But yeah, my parents read it, and I think the people who it mattered most, because a lot of it is about my childhood and certain things that happened during my upbringing, so it was very important that my parents be okay with it. I think there was one change. I can't even remember, but it was something very minor that my mom was like, that's not what happened.
And we trust her on this. Let's take some questions from the audience, then we'll talk some more. If you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll repeat it. Babs.
This is kind of a silly question, but how did you come to the titles of your books? Because it's so crucial that you condense an entire book into a 2-sentence synopsis.
I got fucked, so that's all I could say. It's hats and eyeglasses is an expression that my family used. It's about what happens when you're losing a lot. It's like when a ship goes down. And it was just a line in the book, and they were like, let's call it that. And I was like, oh no, that's a very bad title. But I didn't think I had any power. I tell all writers now, do not put a cover that you don't like or a title on your book that you don't like. But I didn't know that. So that's me. So.
All right. Well, I was as I was writing the essays that I did not know would become a memoir, but where I was sharing them for free online, I was really critiquing the body keeps the score and modern somatic models that posit young women as being responsible for coming back into the window of tolerance with their hard-earned paychecks. And so the body is a doorway instead of the body is a scorekeeper. Like, I don't want to play a game I didn't, sign up for. What if the body isn't this, vindictive scorekeeper? What if it's a portal into more than human relationships, other beings? And so it was kind of, I was a little worried about keeping the title, to be honest, because it was a call and response with another title, but it ended up working, I think.
Mine was a working title, which was based on my tattoo. And so it was just a working title, and I didn't actually think that they were, every time I was like, should I change the title? And they're like, no, keep the title. And so it made it all the way through, and it's from a quote from a British actress in the time of Oscar Wilde, when homosexuality was still legal. And she got asked by a member of the press what she felt about a couple of guys in the chorus of the play that she was in who were gay. And she said, darling, I don't care what they do in private as long as they don't do it in the street and frighten horses. And, when I came out, and that is the background that I came from. It's like, whatever you do, you've got to keep it behind closed doors, don't talk about it, don't make a fuss. And when I came out, I really wanted to turn that into an imperative and say, and I tattooed it on my flesh to remind myself that, even in moments of fear, this is what I was going to do, and, this tattoo has never been more valuable now.
Well, for a long time, I was calling that book gentian, which is, if anybody knows the closed purple bottle gentian, it's a late blooming wildflower here that's pretty rare. It's a species of concern. It's this brilliant Eve Klein blue. And I loved it because it's like a species of concern, and it's closed to outsiders, like it needs a specialized pollinator, and it never opens to protect its sex. And I write about it a lot in there, because the uprising, the killing happened sort of in the season of the gentian. And so that was my title for a long time. And bless my publisher, they didn't want me to change it. They didn't ask me to, even though nobody can pronounce it. But they did tell me I had to have a subtitle that had the word memoir in it. And I was like, shit, okay. Gentian, a memoir of And then I was like, and so I was walking around outside trying to think of it. And then I was like, oh, the eighth moon, a memoir of. And the words came easily. So the eighth moon actually comes from, in the uprising, they sent a threatening handwritten letter to the sheriff just before the shooting. And it's sent anonymously, and they dated the eighth moon. They also sent it from the camp of the Leatherheads, because they're all wearing these leather masks. And the letter is truly frightening. Like, I read it, and it's in there, so that's the title. So when the sheriff is shot, it's in August of 1845, so the eighth moon.
Cool. I saw some other hands. Okay, so when you think about the book, they all came out in the last year. How has your life changed since they came out? How are people reacting to you? Not to the book. I'm not asking about your reviews, but they were so personal. How are people reacting to them?
Oh man, I kind of want to ask for advice. So I want to turn this question over to both of you and ask for advice, because I've had books of essays and fiction come out, and I can handle that, but I've had a real vulnerability hangover from this book coming out. It's only been a month, and I am both extraordinarily moved by the way people have shared their own stories and reached out, but I also feel like I'm in a freeze state. It's so intense.
Yeah, I'm going to speak directly to that.
Please.
Because where you are now,
Yeah.
I remember being in that exact place a month after publication. I went into a state of total and utter, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a feeling of panic and vulnerability and terror and what the hell now, and what is this new world that I'm in. And I reached out to a lot of my writer friends and said, did you go through this like a month after your publication? They were like, oh yeah, that's familiar territory. And you do move through it. And I think it is in its sense its own transition. You are in a state of transition because you're transitioning from before you publish something like this to after, and then eventually, and it's like we've all been through over the last couple of months with Trump getting into power. So this process of transition of who am I going to be in this place now, and where am I going to find my feet, and what am I going to do, and how does this change me? And so it does pass. So fear not, but it's just time. It does pass. I think what I have found is that I was really fearful in the run-up to my memoir coming out, because I thought of all the coulds, all the backlash that could happen to someone like me by going public in this way. And for the most part, it hasn't happened. And when it has happened, it's like it's just like water off a duck's back, because it's so silly. You know, people writing the most ludicrous hate mail that just means nothing and has no emotional impact because it's so meaningless. What I have found is that the extraordinary joy that I have got in connecting with readers has like surpassed anything I could possibly have imagined. And it's not just trans people, it's particularly connecting with parents of trans kids, because I really feel like they are the ones who, you know, I don't want to say a parent is suffering more than a child, but my God, I know that protective instinct, and if somebody were coming after my kid, I can't imagine how I would ever sleep again. And so being able to kind of bridge that gap for them by being an adult who can speak about trans issues, and a very unthreatening adult, because I mean, look at me, I'm like the least scary person you could possibly be. And also being a parent myself, so I understand their parenting instincts. I think that I have kind of filled that little gap for a lot of people that didn't exist before. So being able to speak to trans parents and you know, communicate with them online has really been a blessing.
You know, the memoir part wasn't so hard because I didn't feel super exposed. And I wasn't like, I feel exposed for the ideals I have in the book. And I feel very exposed in this political moment, in probably ways that everybody in this room does. Like, everybody's like, God, do I delete that Facebook post? I said that to that person. Like, and you know, there's a lot of, I think probably a lot of people have kind of epigenetic trauma. You know, my family's part Jewish, and so there's like a lot of received knowledge or feelings about threats that happened. Like when my dad was a very little kid, a cross was burned on his lawn and he lost everything. And I'm sure that shaped my childhood. And I'm sure that shapes my fears in this moment. But my father also fought in World War II and was a proud, like, card-carrying, left progressive person, and really believed in redistributing power and redistributing wealth. So he also taught me not to be afraid. So like the fears that I have are really about the political ideas in the book, and whether our time is gonna continue to allow for them. And then there's also what Oliver was saying about God the moment the book comes out, and how terrifying that is. Like, it's a little bit like, for the last book, it felt very disassociated for 3 months or more. And I was doing a lot of events to support it. And that's weird and hard. And I didn't understand it before. And I'm about to go back into that, and I'm terrified again.
Yeah, it is terrifying. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Say it again. I feel like my husband just said something to me that only I can hear. But he doesn't appear to be moving his lips, so.
Question for Oliver. Have your children read the book, and how did they react when you transitioned?
They haven't read the book because they don't care, because I'm just embarrassing at this point because they're teenagers. So when I came out as queer, they were fine about it. They were all very young. It made sense to them. You know, it was kind of almost exciting, I think. It's like they had the special thing that nobody else at school had. Cool. When I started to transition, it was different. So, and they all reacted differently. So my two young daughters, who are now 16, were kind of fine with it. They had sort of seen it. They called me on it before I told them. They were like, hey, you're kind of trans, aren't you? You know, when are we going to deal with this? My middle son just didn't really care because he doesn't care about anything. My eldest son found it really hard. He felt like he was losing his mum. And that was really, really hard for him, and it took him a really long time. And I'm honest about that because when I started writing this, I started talking to Jenny Finney-Boylan, who's written multiple essays about memoirs about her transition. And she said to me, when she wrote She's Not There, she really glossed over the effect that it had on her children. And she said she was doing that because she felt like she had to be like a spokesperson for the trans community, and she didn't want to give anybody any ammunition against her, given that there is this like kind of thing about trans people being a threat to women and children. But she said that she did them a disservice. And she wasn't honest to them, because then they felt they had to uphold this image of being like completely okay with it when it was hard for them. And it's not the truth. So I really lean into not just how hard it was for my children, but my fears about the effect that it would have on them. And I really go into that. And some of those fears did come true in that people made it the thing. Like anything else that happened in our lives, it all came back to the fact that I was trans, and that was to blame for everything. And that follows them around in a way that I think is really hard for them. And it was a lot harder for them to explain to their friends. You know, going to school, yeah, my mum's gay, she's got a girlfriend is one thing, but going into school like my mum's my dad, and then people don't really get it, and you know, it was confusing, yeah.
Yeah, back there. I can't see. Yeah,
My
Cookie.
question is probably for all of you. It's really about, you know, how to keep writing. So you all talked about how difficult and probably draining, right, when you go deep into yourself and you have to write. That I'm going through myself, you know, each 10 pages I wrote, and I felt like I have to rest for 10 years. So how did you keep it going? Did you just write yourself, or did you have a mentor, or did you join a writing group, or any advice?
I sold my book on spec, which means I was contractually and financially supposed to hand it in, or they would take back the money. So I would say doing that is a really good engine to finish a book. So I had 6 months, and I created a really, really strict writing schedule, and I made sure I met it at my word count every day. But it was not fun, and it sapped my, I will say, like, I less and less think I want to do that type of writing, because I want to have a long life as a writer. So I've been asking myself, where do I reach flow state? I did not reach flow state with this. I think it was an important project, but I do think if the type of writing you're doing is hard, it might be an interesting thing to ask, is there a different type of writing I'm supposed to be doing? You know, the fantasy novelist Brandon Sanderson, who I love, does these amazing free lectures about writing online, says, if it's taking you all day to write 250 words, let me assure you, you're not a good enough writer to be writing that slow. You have to be like brilliant to be spending that much time on that little amount of writing. Like, find your love, your eros, your drive. For me, the real breakthrough happened after I wrote this, which is I was like, I think I'm gonna go back to writing fantasy and see if I can remember loving writing again. Because this was I had to really create such a regimented schedule, and I had to show up every day. I was treat motivated. You know, I was like, I'm gonna have a treat after I do this. Like, I had to kind of bargain with myself to get through it. But then I started writing fantasy, and it would be like 10,000 words 8 hours later, and I'd be like dizzy. And I was like, oh, this is the type of writing.
When you say fantasy, what do you mean, so?
When I say fantasy, I mean epic world building, sci-fi. I mean, I'm romantasy. Romance. I mean, I love stories, and when I write love stories, I lose myself. Be they set on Mars or in a dragon-infested land. But yeah, this was not set on Mars, and there was no romantic hero, so it was a little hard for me to get through. Now, all I do is I treat writing like hygiene, which is when I have a project, I have to write 500 words each day, and I always exceed that, but I can't not. I wake up and it's the first thing I do. And I might throw them out later in the day or the next day, but I just every single day want to keep that rock rolling.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have put it better than that, but I'm going to echo exactly what Sophie has just said in different words, which is you really have to love what you're writing.
Yeah.
It is hard. Writing good words is hard. It is draining and it is exhausting. And if you come out of a morning's writing feeling utterly like your brain is mush, that's good, is what it's meant to be. But to keep doing that day after day after day, you've really got to enjoy what you're doing. The other thing, and I'm not sure that I would recommend this, but this is what I did, is I didn't have a plan B. I knew I had a certain amount of time in which I could write this book because I had all my 4 children at home. I was a solo parent. My ex-husband was not doing any parenting at all. So I couldn't get a full-time job because I needed all these, I needed to be at home for all of these damn children. And so I had like 4 hours in the middle of every day when they were all at school, because they'd all go to fucking children, they all go to school and come home at different times. So you've got this tiny little window in between, and I'm like, okay, I have that to write, I'm going to use that to write, I'm going to unplug everything, nobody is disturbing me, and I'm going to get this damn book published, and I have to get the book published because I have no plan B. If at the end of all this, the book doesn't get published, I'm working at Starbucks the rest of my life. And so, not sure that's the best way to go, but if you've got the bravery for it, do that.
I mean, for me, I got a master's in the United Kingdom a long time ago, and at the University of East Anglia, which is bills itself to people as sort of the starter school for the Booker Prize, which is a lot of hubris. And I was not the person who was ever gonna, I'm not interested in writing realist fiction. That's not ever gonna be my jam, but my master's is in fiction. And all my friends basically ended up on Booker long lists, which is a lot of weight. I was so relieved when I moved to Margaretville and nobody asked me what I was working on. Because nobody was a writer then. It was before there were people from Brooklyn up here. It was a really freeing moment. And, I mean, for me, I wrote in the face of not being published, which was really hard because I couldn't not write. It was like being an alcoholic, essentially. For me, I can't not write. If you don't have that, don't do it. It sucks. I kind of write experimental stuff. I need to teach to support myself. I use grants. I'm lucky I have a little inherited money from my parents. I'm gonna talk about the money a second, which is how I support myself. And I don't, I'm working on another book where I could maybe do a proposal for it, but I'm scared to because I don't want to commit to what the voice for that book might look like in advance. And so I think for everybody, it's we each have to make our decisions about what moving forward looks like. But I do have some strategies I use when I'm really stuck. I use a timer for 45 minutes, and then I make myself take 15 minutes off. And that 45 minutes, if I read or if I just doodle, whatever, it's okay. I teach a lot, and I teach a lot of writing grad students. And the thing that I kind of most try and teach them is to be gentle to themselves. So I would say be gentle, yeah.
Yeah, when people say to me, I want to be a writer, I think, no, you don't. Nobody chooses that.
And it's always the lawyers who say that are I've got a memoir. I was no, you don't.
Cookie, you have a question?
Yes, Sophie. My daughter was diagnosed with EDS after many years of going to different specialists and nobody figuring out what was wrong. I was just curious as to what type of medical person finally came up with your diagnosis.
Yeah, I'm curious how your daughter reached hers. I mean, I should, given the very weird things that were happening to me at a young age, it's kind of pretty horrible that I wasn't diagnosed by a pediatrician or someone. I had thoracic outlet syndrome, I had weird blood pooling and postural orthostatic tachycardia. There were tons of red flags that should have probably been caught. But it took I got radically ill at 16, and it took in 2010, and it took until 2016 and many misdiagnoses and mistreatment until I got myself to an immunologist who specialized in mast cell activation syndrome, because I was having these serious anaphylactic reactions all the time. And I was actually sitting, my dad drove me. I was so sick that I couldn't drive. It was like my last semester of college. And I was sitting in the waiting room with him, like, you can't see it, but like, I sit weird. Like, my body, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a collagen disorder with 15 different subtypes. And it means that, you're too stretchy. That your connective tissue doesn't work correctly, but it means you're hyperflexible. So she came out and looked at me in the waiting room. This is an immunologist, not a geneticist. And she said, I know what's wrong with you. And I was like, what? And she took me into the back room and she gave me something called the biting test, which is this genetic test where you measure your wingspan, your flexibility, and she's like, you have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And she was seeing that all of these patients that were coming in with severe mast cell disease also had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And now there's a direct correlation between those two conditions. If you have one, you very often have the other. But at that point, no one other than her had made that connection. And so she diagnosed me on the spot. Then it was terrifying because she was like, don't Google it. She was like, just see all these doctors, get all these things checked out immediately, don't Google it. So I Googled it. But yeah, how did your daughter find out?
It was finally a neuroimmunologist in Miami.
Wow.
She was living in Miami.
That's my oldest friend. Her mother was my mother's boyfriend.
Came up with it. And also did blood tests to test for childhood diseases. She was also about 15 or 16 at the time. And found that she had like Coxsackie disease and some other things that were contributing. But yeah, we continued to follow with this person even after she left Florida. She's still.
Yeah, you were misdiagnosed for many years, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pounded full of medicine that I didn't need.
Right. Right. So you're not writing a memoir again. Oliver's writing fiction. Jennifer's writing what?
So I'm I have two book projects. Like one is a very tiny book project for a small publisher in the UK called Joan Publishing that publishes kind of art adjacent essays. And I'm writing about my dad and this artist from LA, Mike Kelly. He's actually from Detroit. And he committed suicide in 2014. Anyway, when I was 21, I took my dad to see a Mike Kelly show at the Hirshhorn. And if any of you know Mike Kelly's work, he was making at that point work where there were like toys scattered on Afghans that were in very sexually suggestive poses. It's really beautiful but weird work. Anyway, so I took my dad to the show, and I was a 21-year-old and I was about to graduate from college and about to become a stripper, and obviously taking my dad there in some kind of aggro kind of kid way. I was also about to start a PhD program in art history. And for years I thought my dad hated it until he died. And then I found the brochure and in his bedside table with his typewritten response to the show. And my dad couldn't type, so his secretary typed it for him. So I'm writing a little book about that. And then I am starting to work on a book. I've been writing about weeds a lot for the last 5 years or 10 years or something. So I'm starting to work on a book on weeds and capitalism, which is what I'm calling it. But it's not really, I don't know. It is about weeds. The capitalism bit is because it's my way of formulating my thinking about it. Yeah.
Cool. Do you have your hand up? Yeah. You.
Okay, yeah. No, I just
What's your poet's
wanted to
department?
say about, that you're all talking about, the other things you're writing, that when I'm a high school librarian, and when I was in school and we had to read these, a YA book for, YA lit. So anyway, and it was a great book, and it was by Anonymous, and because I'm a librarian, I have to go down this rabbit hole, and I finally found who I thought was the author, because I wanted to tell them. And the book was just, it just caught adolescent angst and just that whole thing about being an adolescent. Just about this boy, you know, it was something, something Jonah Black, the Diary of Jonah, you know, there's 4 books, anonymous. And, you know, there's like a whole, anyway, him and what happens with girlfriends and everything. So I found who I thought it was, and I contacted them, and I said, did you write these books? Because it's not on your, you know, your list of books or anything you write. And they said, yes, I did write them, and it was Jenny Finney Boylan. And I said, well, she said, you know, I think, and the books were nothing about transitioning, but she goes, I wrote them when I was transitioning, and she teaches in a college in Maine, and her student was Cecily Van Zegesar, who writes The Gossip Girl. So she said, I guess she needed, you know, she was going through stuff, and she said, listen, this publisher, they give you, it's a formula, that's, you know, like the guy. And she said, and so she wrote those books when she was going through that. And like I said, nothing about that at all, but I just felt to me that I said, wow, because you captured it, even though it's fiction, you know, YA fiction, and these books were great. I took it from my own teenager's shelf when I needed, you know, to read something. So I just thought it was interesting that, you know, and it made sense to me that somebody captured that, a different type of transition. Nothing to do, I mean, there's like a great scene where they have, you know, they're in a small world in Disney World and they're having sex and they get off the ride. And I mean, crazy stuff, but it was really a good book, very grounded in just YA. So I just thought it was interesting, and it turned out to be that, and she said, yeah, well, Cecily said, you know, gave me the idea and put me onto it, and I wrote those books, but she didn't think they were very good, and that's why she didn't have them.
I'm just going to say, if you want a writer who can write both male characters and female characters, just ask a trans person.
So I had to share that because of what you mentioned.
Do you think, I mean, was she shocked that you had found her?
You know, I don't know. That's how she didn't say she was shocked. This is you know, a little while ago now, but I don't think she was shocked. You know, I guess it wasn't like a hidden thing, but you know, like I said, like, you know, I'm like a dog with a bone. You know, I have
librarian.
Yeah,
we know about you, librarians.
Yeah.
You innocent librarians.
Just had to find, yeah.
So, Sophie, what are you working on now? I know you say romantasy, but tell me what it is.
Well, I always say, like, don't be a writer unless you want a regular ego deflation. You can sell a lot of books, and then you can write a book and it cannot sell. So last year I wrote the first book in an with a trans main character, and it hasn't sold because of that, which has been a really intense thing. It's just I've been told it's like too queer, and it's a queer retelling of Tristan and Isolde where characters shift genders and shift species. It's like it's a novel of transitioning, and yeah, I love it. It is my heart blood. It has everything in it: opera, you know, like symbiosis, sword play, like it's everything. I love my main character, but it's been, in fact, it was almost bought, and then Trump published that list of the words that are not allowed. And the publisher that was about to buy it and was drawing up a contract ghosted me, which is crazy. So to get over my heartbreak about this, I have decided to write a very, very smutty retelling of Joan of Arc's story.
I knew smutty was in this story.
What if Joan of Arc was a little bit trickier and she got a happy ending?
I knew you were writing something dirty. That's why I asked. And so you're writing fiction, Oliver. What's it about?
Well, I've been writing this book for the last year, and then Trump got into power and everything changed. So the premise of the book, what I wanted to do was I wanted to take a bunch of trans people from America and move them into the English countryside and have them fuck shit up. And I had everything. I had everything in this book. I had the characters, I had the villages, I had the trans people, I had the house, I had everything. I just didn't have the motivation as to why they were going to move from America to the English countryside. So I was like, Thank you for giving my characters the motivation they needed, I think. So yeah, that's what I'm writing. Watch this space in a couple of years' time. I don't know if it'll get published, maybe it won't get published, but you know, it'll come out somehow, even if I have to
It'll
self-publish.
get published in the UK.
It'll get published in the UK.
Talk about memoirs that have moved you, because we're on a memoir panel. What memoirs do you love?
Oh, are you looking at me?
Yes.
We're all looking at you.
Well, I'm going to actually talk about two novels that are kind of memoirs. The first is a book called Sleepless Nights by Elizabeth Hardwick, which she wrote in the 70s. It's her divorce book.
I forget that that's not a memoir.
Yeah, and anyway, she jams into it like wholesale. So she was a person, she was like a writer for the New York Review of Books. And she like puts in wholesale pieces about from New York Review columns that she wrote, and it's so beautiful because she kind of mashes up time, and it's such a strange book, and it's so beautiful in her way of writing it. So I love that book. And the other one is a book called Melina, which is by an Austrian poet named Ingeborg Bachmann, who actually ended up dying shortly after she wrote it. She was a child of kind of just sort of post-war Germany, or Austria actually. And she had a PhD in philosophy and blah, 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 and she was a poet. And so she writes this book. It's about a kind of woman who's pulled between a bunch of relationships, and it's basically her life. Anyway, Ingeborg Bachmann dies of burns because she was smoking in bed because she was on barbiturates. So her story is really tragic, but the book is so beautiful, and it's a book about like kind of patriarchy. And I love it. I probably have some other ones like that I love books. So I could like name others, but those are the first two ones that come off the top of my head.
Oliver.
I mean, the memoir that changed my life really was Roxane Gay's Hunger. Because Roxane Gay's Hunger, I had finished the final draft of my memoir, and I'd read the book. I'd read everything she'd ever written because I'm like a Roxane Gay obsessive stalker type person, and I had handed my manuscript into my agent, and she was in the process of sending it out to editors, and it was getting turned down. And all of the editors were saying the same thing, which is, you know, we don't really know who this is for. We don't know, it feels a little bit too vague. We don't know who the audience is. We're not quite sure how we would market this book. And I agreed with them because when I was writing it, I had this idea that I wanted to talk to a mainstream audience. I didn't want to write a book for trans people because there's a lot of trans people writing for trans people. I wanted to write about the trans experience to a mainstream audience, but there was something about writing for this big morass of people that felt a little inhibiting, and there were places that I hadn't managed to go in this manuscript because I was just too scared. And in this process of while the book was being rejected by editors, Roxane Gay announced that she was opening an imprint at Grove Atlantic. And the minute I read the press release, I thought, okay, I know what I need to do. So I called up my agent and I said, I want you to pull the manuscript from submission. And my agent was like, are you fucking crazy? And I'm like, no, I really want you to do this. I'm gonna rewrite it one last time. And I didn't tell her, I just thought in my head, I'm gonna write directly to Roxane Gay. Because I'd read her book and she had spoken so much about writing into trauma and about how to do it. And I thought, I can tell this story directly to Roxane. And obviously she's never gonna read it, you know, she's just opened an imprint, she's gonna have a zillion people sending books to her, but it'll help me focus. It'll help if I feel safe writing to her. So I spent 9 months doing this final revision on the manuscript, and I managed to kind of go there and sent it back to my agent. And about a month later, I was in the car, and my agent never calls me. She says, I will never call you unless I've got really good news or really bad news, otherwise I'll email you. And I was in the car, I was in traffic jam, luckily, and she called me. And so I thought, I'm nearly home, shall I wait? And I thought, like, no, I'll pick up the phone. I picked up the phone and she said, I've got some news for you. And I said, what's that? She said, Roxane Gay just made an offer on your book. And I screamed so loudly that people out on the sidewalk heard me. So yeah, that novel, that memoir, it changed my life because it got me published by Grove Atlantic and by Roxane Gay, but it really changed the way I wrote the memoir. So I'm very grateful to her for many, many reasons.
Sophie.
So, yeah, I think two different poles. One of my favorite books is The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. I don't know if anyone here has read it. She wrote it in her 50s in the early 20th century. She was a Scottish writer who didn't ever get much recognition during her life, but she hiked every day the Scottish Highlands. And she wrote this memoir that it got no recognition during her life. It is one of the most brilliant pieces of nature writing, and about the experience of developing a kind of almost like romantic intimacy with place. It's like a master class in writing about place, about love, about heartbreak. It's short and perfect. Like, I reread it a lot as a kind of primer on what language can do. I quote it all the time. She talks about this moment where she walks the body transparent. And I remember I read that and I was like, whoa! And then on the other side of it is Melissa Pecos and Leslie Jameson, who are two female memoirists who are just so brave and so, they're so good at, I mean, Melissa Pecos in particular is good at writing about the same material a couple of years later with a whole new lens. And as a reader of hers that has traveled with her, it's so interesting to see someone develop. So yeah, those are some of my stars.
Well, now you're all going to go buy books, and these great writers are going to sit in front of the stage and sign them. And thank you guys so much. Thank you all so much. This is great weekend. Thank you.